Hey, my name is Seakga Tladi. This is African Disclosure, and this here is our program for today. Today, I want to bring you two stories that, when you think of them together, they tell us something important about where South Africa and the African continent stand in this rapidly shifting world. First, we're going to go to St. Petersburg in Russia, where the 29th edition of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum is just about to wrap up. 20,000 delegates, more than 130 countries, and for Africa, a forum that has become one of the most significant arenas for advancing the continent's economic interests outside of African borders. So I'm going to be talking to you about some of the top stories coming from the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, the key voices and the strategic significance of what was said and what was agreed at the SPIEF conference. And then the second story brings us back home to Richards Bay on the KwaZulu-Natal coast, where Minister of Electricity and Energy Dr. Kgosientsho Ramakgopa presided over a signing ceremony that marks a genuine milestone in South Africa's long and difficult journey towards energy security. I should clarify there that this didn't happen in Richards Bay, but it's about Richards Bay. This happened in Pretoria. Eskom and the Zululand Energy Terminal have formalized the framework for a partnership that is going to underpin the country's first ever liquefied natural gas import terminal and a 3,000 megawatt gas to power program that the government says is essential to keeping the lights on as we transition away from coal. I was in that room this morning, and I will bring you the voices that you need to hear. So we've got two stories, but they kind of have a common thread, right? A world in transformation and nations making consequential choices about their future. So that is our show for today, and it's going to be a good one. My name is Seakga Tladi. Let's get it going. Let us take you to Russia's cultural capital of St. Petersburg, where one of the most consequential economic forums in the world is coming to an end, right? So we're talking about SPIEF. And more specifically, we're talking about what it means for the African continent in this moment of global transformation. So this is quite a big one. First and foremost, what is SPIEF and why should we care about it as Africa, right? So let's start at the very beginning. The St. Petersburg International Economic Forum was first held in 1997, born out of post-Soviet Russia's desire to attract investment and project itself as a country open for business. Nearly 3 decades later, it has evolved into something more significant. Right? Think of it as Russia's answer to Davos, a high-powered gathering of heads of state, industry leaders, financiers, and academics from across the globe. This year marks the 29th edition of the forum, and it brought together roughly 20,000 representatives from more than 130 countries. And the theme of this year was pragmatic dialogue, the path to a stable future. A very important theme if you think about it, because we do live in a very unstable time, right? Wars begin at the drop of a pin. Tariff regimes come and go like this. We've got new things happening all the time. And because we're so interconnected, something that happens all the way in Venezuela has consequences in China or in Africa, right? So we are in a very unstable era of geopolitics. And this theme, pragmatic dialogue, the path to a stable future, becomes quite relevant in that light. So the program at SPIEF spans more than 170 sessions, from energy markets to AI sessions to what Russia is calling the new architecture of the global economic cooperation. So that's all the things that are being discussed in these 170 sessions. But here's why Africa should be paying very close attention. right? In the aftermath of the 2022 Ukraine war, Western governments and major multinationals began pulling out of Russia. SPIEF didn't collapse though. In fact, it pivoted. It became a showcase for Moscow's deepening ties with the global south, with Asia, with Africa, with Latin America. Attendance remained strong at SPIEF. And this year, the forum once again demonstrated that Russia has no shortage of willing international partners to engage with. No shortage at all. This year's guest country, the guest of honor country, was Saudi Arabia, but it was the African delegations, the ministers, the presidents, and the business councils. It was those delegations that generated some of the forum's most significant headlines, at least from my perspective, right? With the third Russia-Africa summit on the horizon, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum of this year functioned as a critical staging ground, a place where they could lay the foundations and build momentum and send the political signals, which will be continued and further discussed at the upcoming Russia-Africa summit. And the signals they were sending were loud and clear. It's that the Russo-African relationship is deepening, and the global south is asserting itself on its own terms. So that is a brief breakdown of what is SPIEF and why it should matter to Africans. That's very clear for us. But let's get into perhaps one of the most powerful moments, at least symbolically. This is one of the most powerful moments of this year's forum. And it was the president of Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan, both at the Kremlin for a state visit and on the plenary stage at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. President Hassan made history this week as only the second Tanzanian head of state ever to visit Russia. The first was Tanzania's founding father, Julius Nyerere, back in 1969. So that is 57 years ago. 57 years between visits to Russia from a Tanzanian president. And the significance of that context cannot be ignored or overstated. Right? So that is a particularly important moment for us as Africans, because one of our leaders is highlighted at this stage, right? She had the presidential visit as well as speaking at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, further just highlighting. And I'm sure there was a lot of deals that were made as well between Tanzania and Russia. And we'll get into the specifics of some of those deals as well later in the show. But I just wanted to emphasize that the importance of the Tanzanian president's presence there is great. It's very, very important. Before traveling to St. Petersburg, President Hassan held talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin. And by some of the accounts that I've engaged with, it was a meeting of substance. The two leaders discussed energy, transport and logistics, healthcare, education, and geological explorations as key areas for expanded cooperation between Tanzania and Russia. They also exchanged views on international affairs and discussed preparations for the upcoming Russia-Africa summit. And then these talks concluded at the Kremlin, and, obviously the Tanzanian president was presented, and it was a beautiful little ceremonial moment. Okay. A rich and important moment for Tanzania, particularly. I mean, 50 odd something years since the last visit. So I want to go now to some of the moments, some of the speeches that were given by the Tanzanian president, as well as President Vladimir Putin, as they met with each other at the Kremlin and as they spoke at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. So without any further ado, let's listen to the two heads of state who were in the limelight at this year's SPIEF.
Moving on to trade and investment, there are 5 sectors with immediate and practical opportunities for Tanzania-Russian cooperation. First, Tanzania is endowed with vast mineral resources such as gold, uranium, nickel, graphite, and critical rare minerals or elements. In that regard, we welcome collaboration in conducting geological survey to ascertain actual availability of mining deposits across the country. We are also inviting partners for establishment of smelters, refineries, or smelters and refineries for the mineral beneficiation. Second, at the food basket of the region, Tanzania is undergoing massive agricultural transformation that demands reliable, affordable, and high-quality supply of agricultural inputs. Investment in fertilizer production, as Minister Maxim has said, is highly encouraged. We are well positioned to serve more than 500 million consumers in East and Southern African market. It is also pleasing to note that some of the Russian investors have already embarked on crop production in some parts of Tanzania. We all know that there's a company which already is producing banana in Morogoro region of Tanzania. So that's a starting point, and we'll continue with some other crops. Indeed, such initiatives are mostly welcome and highly encouraged. Third is on the generation of clean energy. Tanzania possesses significant uranium reserves and is committed to a diversified, modern, and low carbon energy mix. We are therefore actively considering incorporating small modular reactors technology in the long-term energy generation plan. Rosatom has shown great interest in this project, and the technical dialogue in line with the safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Agency continue to be undertaken. The other area is oil and gas. Tanzania has discovered about 57 TCF of natural gas, but we still need more exploration. So the private sector, Russian private sector, is invited to work with us on that field. Fourth, on the health and pharmaceuticals, we're encouraging business to consider investing in production of pharmaceuticals, health equipment, and vaccines for both human and livestock. Our target is to reach 60% domestic production of health products by 2030. So you are encouraged to join us. Fifth, on transport and logistics. Tanzania is embarking in one of the most ambitious port infrastructure development, encompassing special economic zone in Bagamoyo area. It is a #1 flagship project of which we welcome Russian enterprises. Tanzania and Russia have been enjoying excellent historic friendship and cooperation for the last 6 decades, grounded by unity, solidarity, and mutual trust. In this case, we are definitely not starting from zero. We are taking off from a partnership that has gained a concrete ground. This is the perfect time now for us to concretize or to concentrate our efforts in facilitating greater economic engagements. Distinguished friends, to be honest, the existing level of trading between Tanzania and Russia does not match the status of our bilateral relations. Our bilateral trade by 2025 was below $500 million United States dollars. By 2024, Russia represents less than 1% of Tanzania's total trade volume. This is not where we should be. It is precisely this gap between the potential investment and trading and our actual performance that brings us together in this hall or in this room. Certainly, we have massive opportunities in different sectors of which we can work together.
Global leadership in the world economic ties is conditional on whether the country can ensure its own sovereignty. I wouldn't be exaggerating if I say that this race for sovereignty has started, has kicked off, and it's gaining traction. Right now, the share of BRICS in the world GDP based on purchasing power parity stands at 40%, whereas the G7 share is less than 29%. So BRICS has already overtaken the G7, and it did so back in 2020, but this gap is increasing. This gap is expected to grow in favor of BRICS. But what are the sources explaining this process? This is due to the fact that BRICS is going to grow at a steadily greater pace. The pace is greater right now, but this trend is going to persist. The G7 is going to grow at best by 1.1% per year, whereas BRICS nations are going to grow by more than 4%.
All right, we've just heard from President Vladimir Putin of Russia and President Samia Suluhu Hassan of Tanzania. And yeah, I mean, President Hassan's participation in this forum was not merely ceremonial, right? They announced deals. They announced the local currency settlement mechanism, which we'll talk about a little bit. And this is a framework that allows the two countries to trade in their own currency, bypassing the US dollar. We'll talk more about the agenda of de-dollarisation that was somewhat spoken about at the SPIEF conference as well, according to some reports. So that is one of the big moments, the presidential participation. But now I want to get into a top five, right? So I want to get into the top 5 stories coming from SPIEF. And these are the most important African stories to emerge from the forum. Number 1, equal partnership, not extraction. That is the first big theme that we can think about. The theme of equality in partnership echoed throughout the Africa-focused sessions. And perhaps no one put it more plainly than Julius Matai, Sierra Leone's Minister of Mines and Mineral Resources, who spoke to journalists on the sidelines of the forum. He said basically that Russia is not just investing in mineral resources in Africa, but it's investing in African people as well. Matai contrasted Russia's approach with that of many Western nations, noting that while a lot of developed economies come to Africa primarily to extract raw materials, Russia had chosen to invest through what he calls human capacity development. He pointed to the multipolar world as a genuine opportunity for Africa, saying that it was giving the continent access to diverse markets, new sources of financing, and the ability to build equal partnerships. He also noted that the BRICS grouping was acting as a magnet for other African countries. And he also noted that Russia has created a favorable position for Africans, and that this year's SPIEF has just opened more doors. So that is our first big story. And it's the idea of fair collaboration between Russia and Africa. This is something that Russia has been emphasizing for a long time, that they want to work with us on an interest-based level. What is it that Africa needs and wants based on its own development priorities? What is it that Russia needs and wants based on its own priorities? And in what ways can we help each other? Where we are congruent, we can work together. Where we are not congruent, we can look for other partners. But the key thing is that this is not a big partner and a little partner. This isn't a parental sort of relationship or a big broing sort of relationship where there's the big country that's helping out. No, this is interest-based equal partnership. So maybe that's the first theme of SPIEF that we can think of. Second is the one about Zimbabwe and the strength of solidarity with Russia. So from Zimbabwe came a powerful statement about what Russia's partnership has meant in times of crisis. July Moyo, Zimbabwe's Minister of Energy and Power Development, was direct. He said that they rely on the Russian Federation for our defense, especially when sanctions were imposed on Zimbabwe. Unilateral sanctions by the Americans and their partners in the West, mind you. Moyo described how the Russia and Zimbabwe relationship had given the country strength to withstand external pressure and spoke of the importance of the partnership built on mutual respect rather than conditionality. Zimbabwe's experience, the minister suggested, holds lessons for other African nations in navigating a world where major powers continue to use economic tools as instruments of political leverage. Let's go to a video right now where some of our correspondents got a brief interview with Minister Moyo. Let's hear what he has to say directly.
Our relationship obviously was deepened by the agreement that we signed, and our experiences in the issue of sanctions has resulted in even deeper relationship between us. We do this in the national interest. When countries cooperate the way we are doing, we want to learn from each other. We want to strengthen each other against adversaries, and we think that our relationship with the Russian Federation has given us this strength. In the area of energy, when you are attacked by those who do sanctions, they target three things. The first one is your food security. And Zimbabwe has been attacked on food security, but we have been able, through the leadership of our president, to overcome. And we are now self-sufficient in wheat production. The second one, the attack, is energy. And the energy issues are so that you don't have enablers that can make the economy grow. So our relationship with the Russian Federation in the area of energy is really to overcome sanctions. When we strengthen each other and we have energy supply, we know that it will encourage all the other sectors of the economy. The third area which they attack you is in the area of finance. And our financial systems have been attacked. We have no credit lines. And we think that our relationship with the Russian Federation allows us to have bilateral financing mechanisms, which in a lot of cases we are being denied by the West because of these sanctions. Well, our president always says Zimbabwe will be built by Zimbabweans. In Shona they say nyika inovakwa nevene vayo, ilizwe lakiwa ngavanikazi valo. The country is going to be built by us. And we have learned it because of sanctions, that in fact this is true. So we have mobilized internal resources of our capital markets to also say they must invest in energy. And because of this, both private and state pension schemes are now investing. So financial mobilization of your own internal resources is very crucial. Secondly, we have been denied multilateral funding agencies to fund us, and we have had to rely on bilateral. And this is where friends like the Russian Federation come in, and other friends who can now invest bilaterally, both by state actors as well as the private sectors from those countries which are friendly to us. So you value your friends because of sanctions more than you value them if you were borrowing from all and sundry.
All right, that was Zimbabwe's Minister July Moyo, and that was our second major theme coming from this year's SPIEF conference. Our third major theme is the one of feeding Africa. Food security. A very, very big one. Fertilizers and food security are one of the most practically consequential developments coming from SPIEF. right? So Dmitry Konyaev, the general director of Russia's major fertilizer company, he laid out a frank assessment of Africa's hunger crisis and a strategy to help to address it. He basically said that just trying to export more fertilizer from Russia to Africa is not enough to solve the hunger crisis. As, you know, logistical prices will keep it high and it'll be out of reach for basic crop farmers, for subsistence crop farmers, for staple crop farmers. So what they're doing is that they're partially localizing fertilizer production, building regional warehouses to optimize supply chains while national governments can step in to subsidize their agricultural sectors. And that signals a strategic shift, right? A shift from Russia as a distant supplier of agricultural inputs to Russia as a localized partner in African food production. And given that many African nations remain acutely vulnerable to global food price shocks, this development deserves serious attention. That's our third story, or third major theme coming from SPIEF this year. And then we get to de-dollarization and financial reform. This has been on the agenda for African countries, for BRICS countries, and for, I'll say, countries which have been marginalized by sanction, okay? We've got a problem where the entire world is almost holding up the dollar. The entire world is working together to stabilize the dollar because we all use the dollar for everything we do. If I want to trade between South Africa and Nigeria, I've got to go and buy dollars and then pay the Nigerian with dollars, and then I will be only then able to get my things. But the problem then becomes that when the people who own the dollar, the Americans, when they decide that they don't like you so much anymore, they sanction you, you can't use their dollars anymore, or it becomes difficult for you to receive their dollars and actually make use of them. And then you're in a problem where now you can't develop, your economy is held back because of this over-reliance on the dollar. So the solution coming from the global south, coming from South Africa, coming from BRICS countries, coming from Russia, is the idea of de-dollarization. Reforming our financial architecture so that the dollar is not the be-all and end-all of the world economy, right? So we already touched on Tanzania's local currency deal, but this needs to be a bigger and more broader idea, right? I've spoken to economists about what stops us from just doing away with the dollar, and the answer is it's a very difficult process. The whole world has to basically move away from the dollar. So there are obstacles in the way, but this is something that is being dealt with through forums like SPIEF. So now we have the arrangement where Tanzania and Russia will trade in each other's currencies, and in that way, they're bypassing the dollar a little bit. But the financial architecture discussions at SPIEF went much further. Elias Monache, the president of South Africa's Black Business Council and a member of the South African BRICS Business Council, he described SPIEF as one of the international forums that brings both policymakers and business people together. He noted that Russia and South Africa trade is growing in agricultural products, in automotive and steel components, and in engineering services. And on the question of financial independence, he pointed out that under Russia's 2024 BRICS currency, alternative payment system, including national currencies and even a common BRICS currency, were being seriously explored. He also raised the prospect of the upcoming Russia-Africa summit, examining how the African Continental Free Trade Area could be aligned with BRICS frameworks, bringing Russia and other partner countries into broader economic alignment with Africa. And I think this is going to be one of the most important factors for the Global South going forward. How can we bypass the power of the dollar so that we do not have to live under the thumb of the Americans? That is a question that is being discussed at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. And then finally, transport, logistics, and infrastructure. So Russia's Deputy Minister of Transport, Dmitry Zverev, addressed one of Africa's most persistent structural bottlenecks, and that is infrastructure. You must remember that a lot of the infrastructure built in Africa was built during colonial times and built for colonial times. If I speak about South Africa particularly, South Africa's public transport system was built for apartheid. It was built to fetch black people, poor black people, from outside the city and then bring them in the city to work and then take them back outside the city to live. But it's not the most conducive system for good transport. Public transport is not the best. So one of the collaborations being discussed between Russia and African countries at SPIEF is this idea of working on transport infrastructure together. Speaking on the sidelines of SPIEF, Dmitry Zverev confirmed that African nations are showing, in his words, huge interest in Russian transport technologies. The areas of interest are highly specific and very relevant as well. So this is unmanned logistics technologies, digital document systems, satellite cargo tracking systems, and decarbonization technologies, including electric buses, trams, and metro solutions. So while he did acknowledge that financing remains a constraint, he also added that this issue is definitely solvable. So we do have to think about the money part of it, right? Where is the money going to come from? Because Russia is not just going to bring the stuff over for free. That wouldn't be in their interest. And remember, we are interest-based partners. So there is the financing issue, but it doesn't seem like the biggest hill to climb over, right? There's many ways to finance. We can finance with some sort of exchange deal. And it's not like we don't have money. And it's not like there aren't BRICS like the Development Bank or the Development Bank of Southern Africa. There are financial tools now and financial institutions that are more favorable to African countries and give you loans that enable you to develop on your own terms, like the Development Bank. So the African Development Bank. So while there is a financing issue, perhaps it is a solvable issue. And this is significant because we've heard repeatedly from African policymakers, including our own, that infrastructure development is the backbone without which trade and investment simply cannot flourish. So Russia appears to understand this and is positioning itself accordingly. So those are the 5 big themes that we can think about coming out of SPIEF. But what's the bigger picture, right? What does SPIEF mean for Africa's place in the world? Because it didn't happen in a vacuum, this forum. It took place against the backdrop of a profoundly shifting global order, one in which the United States is retreating from multilateralism, while China, Russia, and countries in the global south are trying to assert greater economic and political agency. As an African official put it, that we've recently interviewed, it reflects the sentiment shared across SPIEF's Africa sessions this week. And those are the major themes. I'm running it again from after the 5 major themes. So yeah, doing it again. So those are the 5 big stories that I've identified coming out of SPIEF. But let's zoom out now, right? SPIEF 2026 did not happen in a volume. in a vacuum, rather. My mind is failing me now. SPIEF 2026 did not happen in a vacuum. It took place against the backdrop of a profoundly shifting global order where the United States is retreating from multilateralism, while China, Russia, and countries in the global south are trying to assert greater economic and political agency. Right? The world is now characterized by uncertainty. And it's precisely in this moment that progressive forces within the global south have to work together strategically. And that idea found a home in St. Petersburg this week. For Africa, SPIEF matters for several interconnected reasons. First, it's a platform for sovereign economic diplomacy. When Sierra Leone's minister says Russia is investing in people and not just resources, that is a step towards financial sovereignty. Right? That is a political statement about the kind of partnership which Africa is choosing to demand. So when Tanzania signs a local currency agreement, it is a step towards financial sovereignty. Second, SPIEF advances in some ways the de-dollarisation agenda. The conversation about BRICS currencies, national settlement mechanisms, and alternatives to Western financial institutions are not abstract. They're practical steps towards reducing Africa's vulnerability to the external financial pressures which have plagued us for a long time. The kind of pressure that Zimbabwe's minister noted can be weaponized against sovereign nations. It's been weaponized against Zimbabwe before. Third, it connects Africa to the infrastructure investment that it desperately needs, like this idea of exchanging transport infrastructure with Russia. Fourth, SPIEF is a forum that respects African agency. Multiple African ministers at SPIEF this week spoke about choosing their own development path on their own terms with partners of their own choosing. And that framing is very significant in a post-colonial context. The third Russia-Africa summit is on the horizon, and SPIEF 2026 has laid important groundwork. The dialogue is deepening, the partnerships are becoming structured, and Africa is showing up. Showing up not as a spectator. No. We're no longer watching the game. We're playing the game. In fact, we are the star players. We're wearing the big number on the back. And we have to, play for ourselves, play for our own benefit, and shine. And forums like SPIEF is an opportunity to do that. So, the 29th St. Petersburg International Economic Forum is closing its doors this weekend. But the conversations started here about food security, about financial independence, infrastructure, equal partnership, the emerging multipolar world. Those conversations are just getting started. So for Africa, SPIEF 2026 was not just a gathering in a foreign city. It was a statement about where the continent stands, what it demands of its partners, and what kind of future it's building. A future that hopefully we can be proud of. So that is our breakdown of the SPIEF conference. And now we're going to take a short break and move on to our next conversation. My name is Seakga Tladi. Keep it tuned in with us. Welcome back. Now I want to take you somewhere very specific. I want to take you to Richards Bay on the coast of KwaZulu-Natal because something is happening there. Something is happening there that most South Africans maybe haven't fully registered yet. It is a niche little story, or it's not quite as important yet as it will be in the future, right? But despite that, it is a story that could shape the country's energy landscape for the next generation. So, Minister of Electricity and Energy, Dr. Hosiyan Tshura Makgopa, presided over a signing ceremony between Eskom and the Zululand Energy Terminal. And this agreement has formalized a partnership that advances South Africa's first ever liquefied natural gas import terminal and a 3,000 megawatt gas to power program. I was there, I heard the speeches, and I'm going to bring you the moments today that matter. And I'll put them in context for you so you understand exactly what it means for our country. So let's get started. Before we talk about this LNG and megawatts and the solutions, let's first understand the problem that we have, the problem that LNG is trying to solve. LNG is liquefied natural gas. I'm not going to keep saying liquefied natural gas over and over again. So when I'm saying LNG, just know that I'm talking about liquefied natural gas. And what problem does LNG hope to solve? Well, South Africa has an energy crisis. And this is not an abstract thing. This is something that a lot of us have lived with. Remember load shedding? Those rolling blackouts that have plagued our homes, our businesses, our hospitals, our schools. Those rolling blackouts, load shedding, they're a symptom of a system that is under severe strain. Eskom, our national power utility, was built, Eskom built the country's electricity supply almost entirely on coal. And that has worked for a long time, but those old coal plants are aging, they're breaking down, and they're becoming very expensive to run. Never mind all the environmental stuff. So government has a plan to transition towards cleaner energy, so more solar power, more wind power, and that is the direction, that's the destination that we're planning to go to. But here's the problem, is that solar panels can't generate electricity at night, right? And when there's no wind, the wind turbines can't spin, there's no power. So renewable energy by its nature is intermittent. It comes and it goes, and of course, it should be a big part of our energy mix. But when it goes, especially at peak demand hours, you need something that's going to fill in the gap, something reliable, something you can switch on at a moment's notice and it'll run for hours and then you can dial it back down. That's something in the energy transition we're trying to go through in South Africa. It might just be natural gas. Now, South Africa, we do have some gas, okay? And Southern Africa particularly, we do have some gas. Our gas is piped in, coming from Mozambique, delivered through a pipeline, and that gas has been used industrially and for some power generation. But even those gas fields in Mozambique are becoming depleted and the supply is tapering off. So this is what we call the gas cliff. The gas cliff is the moment at which the supply of gas runs out and then there is nothing ready to replace it. That cliff is approaching and our country needs to act now. And the answer that they're pursuing is liquefied natural gas. So how does this work? What is LNG? Rather than piping gas from a single source, LNG is natural gas that has been super cooled. So they make it very, very cold into a liquid form. And then they load it onto special ships. Those ships get transported across the ocean. And at the destination, it is received at a special terminal. And then they warm it back up. So they cooled it into a liquid. They warm it back up into a gas. And then they pump it into a grid, into our electricity grid. You understand? So this approach allows South Africa to import gas from multiple sources around the world, creating flexibility, competition, and most importantly, energy security. The terminal that they're trying to build, the Zululand Energy Terminal, is South Africa's first ever liquefied natural gas import terminal. And the Zululand Energy Terminal is what was being discussed at this meeting today. What is the Zululand Energy Terminal? So, and how did it come to be as well? The story begins in 2024 when Transnet National Ports Authority, the body that manages our ports, appointed a consortium as the preferred bidder to develop an LNG terminal at the port of Richards Bay. That consortium is made up of 3 partners. That is Vopak Terminal Durban. That is a company, a private company, a leading company that does liquefied natural gas. And then the Riatile Group, that's a South African company, and Transnet Pipelines. So those 3 companies together make the consortium. And together they form what we know as the Zululand Energy Terminal. They were granted a 25-year deal to design, develop, construct, finance, operate, and maintain what will become the Zululand Energy Terminal. And this is happening at the port of Richards Bay. Now, this is what the plan might actually look like. In the first phase that is planned, they're going to create what is called a floating storage unit. So this is basically a large ship that is permanently moored, or it's permanently docked or placed at the port. And it's got a storage capacity of many, many thousands of cubic meters of liquefied natural gas. Connected to this will be an onshore regasification system. Remember how I told you they cool it into a liquid, then they have to warm it back up into a gas? When you warm it back up into a gas, it's called regasification. So from the floating storage unit, from the boat that is carrying the liquefied version of the gas, it'll be connected to an onshore regasification system, which will turn it back from the liquid into a gas. And then this can be piped through to power stations. This is the first phase, and it is planned to handle up to 3 million tons of LNG every year, enough to fuel serious industrial and power generation activity. And then we come to phase 2, right? In phase 2, the floating storage unit, the big boat that would be docked at the port, that is going to be replaced by an onshore liquefied natural gas tank. So now they're not going to be keeping the liquefied gas on the boat in water. They'll build a tank where they can keep it on the land. And this is going to have an even bigger storage capacity. And then the regasification capacity would increase to 4.5 million tons a year. So that is basically just a picture of what will happen, what it's going to look like, right? But now let's get into the final investment decision, the point at which the partners formally commit funding and construction begins. This is targeted for 2028. If that timeline holds, commercial operations can begin as early as maybe the final quarter of 2030. Oliver Naidu, the head of the project and the director of the Zululand Energy Terminal, has described this project as one that will change the economic dynamics of KZN and of South Africa, really, right? It'll introduce an alternative source of energy as South Africa battles an energy crisis and transitions towards decarbonization. And the environmental dimension has not been overlooked. The project has gone through extensive public consultation. They've held community meetings in Richards Bay, and they're trying to ensure that local voices are heard and that environmental studies are properly conducted. In fact, in the speech by Mr. Oliver Naidu that you're going to be hearing soon, he speaks very much about the regulatory and environmental approvals that must still happen. This is not a project that is, close to completion. And the reason why it's not close to completion is because the partners involved in this wanted to be a fruitful and long-lasting and sustainable project, which means they've got to put the research in before. And they're taking the time to do that. They're taking the time to get all the relevant licenses and all that. So this is a project that is being built to last and being built to be compliant as well. So today's milestone, the milestone that we are celebrating in the Zululand Energy Terminal, is a big one. So this morning, there was a signing ceremony presided over by Minister Dr. Hassan Eskom and the Zululand Energy Terminal. So they signed a heads of agreement, and what this is a formal document that says these two parties are very seriously committed to working together towards a binding contract. This agreement sets out the framework, the intent, and the key terms that will form the foundation of the eventual long-term deal. It's not the final contract yet, but it's the milestone that makes the final contract possible. So what exactly did they agree on? Well, according to a joint statement by Eskom and the Zululand Energy Terminal, Eskom will assume what they're calling a foundational customer status. So Eskom will be the anchor customer, the one that buys a lot of the LNG. Eskom will be the primary committed buyer, and then they will use the gas to create electricity. They're going to use it to power 3,000 megawatts of gas to power. And this is a big one because we know about the electricity or the energy crisis that we have. 3,000 megawatts. To put that into perspective, it's roughly the equivalent of what 2 full units of the Medupi power station can produce. That's a substantial addition to South Africa's energy generation capacity. And crucially, it's flexible and it's dispatchable at any time. It can be ramped up, it can be ramped down in response to demand, making it the perfect complement to solar and wind energy in our mix, and coal energy as well, right? Our government's integrated resource plan calls for 6,000 megawatts of generation of gas by 2030. And half of that is going to come from independent power producers through the gas IPP program. And the other half is this 3,000 megawatt program. It's Eskom's responsibility. And today's signing advances that commitment. The group chief of Eskom, Dan Marokane, he, was very, very excited for this project and mentioned its importance as well. And then we also have Mr. Oliver Naidu, the head of the project, was very excited. And the minister was also incredibly excited. In fact, I think it would be best for us I want you to hear it from them. I was at the signing ceremony today. I sat in the room and I want to bring you some of those voices now. So let us start with Minister Khosienso Ramakgopa. Let's hear from him. He presided over the ceremony and he spoke about the strategic significance of this agreement for the country's energy future. Let's go to the clip of Minister Ramakgopa.
Acknowledge the leadership of Eskom under the stewardship of Mr. Marokane, the Group Chief Executive, and also acknowledge the presence of the Group Chief Executive of Transnet, Advocate Phillips. Michelle, thank you for being here. The leadership of ZET, Mr. Naidu, Ms. Naidu for being here, and of course Alfred for having championed this exercise. This is an important moment. I think it's a major milestone in our ambition to ensure that we are able to achieve energy security in our country. As the chair has indicated, this matters, this exercise today, because it's sitting on the critical path of that ambition of achieving energy security. Hitherto, we've been on the back foot, explaining ourselves how the system is recovering. as Dan has made the point, and the the chair of the board, Dr. Mteto, has made the point, we are now transitioning. We are transitioning because we are pivoting towards ESCOM 2.0. The conversations is not about whether we have ended load shedding or not. That's something of the past. It remains in history. So what we need to do is to ensure that we're able to achieve energy security for the country and enable growth at the levels that the President had articulated on the occasion of the State of the Nation address. He had set an ambitious target of a GDP growth of 3%. And for that to happen, two of our marquee companies must perform. The first one is Transnet, and I'm really confident that with the work that Minister Creasy and Advocate Phillips are doing, we are going to achieve the level of ambition that we have set for ourselves and the targets that Transnet has set for itself. I think we are going to ensure that we resuscitate the giant of the South African economy. And then on the other side, ESCOM needs to work because energy and electricity is an important lever to lubricate the growth of the South African economy. And thanks to the work that Dan and the team has been doing, now we're having different conversations. So what are those conversations? Those conversations are, how are we going to deploy this excess generating capacity to ensure that we accelerate the growth of the South African economy? And I'm very grateful, Dan, for the work that you and the team have done, in that we have been able to conclude the first generation of concessions that were given to smelters in the country. We started with Samanco and Glencore, and that dispensation has been approved by NERSA, and now it's become a contractual obligation on both parties, that is ESCOM, and on the other side, the private sector players, in this instance, Samanco and Glencore. And for that, Glenn, you have noticed that Glencore has issued a statement, I think late last week, indicating that they are withdrawing their Section 89 notice. The Section 189 notice, what it meant is that Glencore had communicated to its employees its intention to lay them off. And as a result of that tariff dispensation that has been put into place, we have been able to save the 1,500 jobs. Glencore has withdrawn that Section 189 notice. So this is a real and live demonstration of what can be achieved if we are able to judiciously allocate this excess electricity to ensure that we are able to save the South African economy. And not just save the South African economy, but also to resuscitate it. So why does this matter? It matters because, as Dr. Mteto has indicated, late last year, we stood here before the country indicating and unveiling, rather, the Integrated Resource Plan 2025. What the IRP does is to articulate a mix of energy sources that are going to underpin or undergird the South African economy. That IRP envisages that in the next 15 years, we're going to add an additional capacity of 102 gigawatts. And it also goes further to say that 30 gigawatts of that 102 gigawatts must be achieved between now and 2030. And a big part of that 30 gigawatts is that it's going to be gas to power, which constitute 6 gigawatts of that 30 gigawatts. And for us to be able to achieve that, we need to start very, very early in addressing the value chain of that gas to power. What is that value chain? First is the securing of the molecules, and then we have to ensure that the receiving and regasification infrastructure is in place, and then downstream you are able to use that that gas to transform it into electricity. That's the 3 gigawatts that Dan was referring to in relation to Richards Bay. So we are addressing now the component of the receiving and regasification infrastructure. And thank you to the stewardship of Advocate Phillips, Dan, and of course Mr. Siema, and one of the most illustrious and respected private sector players in the form of OPEC, which is part of the ZET, that now we have arrived at the stage where we can announce confidently that we are on course to achieving that milestone. That 6 gigawatt is important for us to be able to ensure that we maintain and live up to the promise of achieving energy security. By 2030, in terms of the same IRP, we anticipate to decommission about 8 gigawatts of coal-fired electricity generation in the country. And that ought to be replaced by a flexible, dispatchable energy source that is also capable of supporting system stability. And gas has been identified as that energy source. And it is important that we give life to that ambition. And what we are signing here today is a perfect illustration that when we make the promise, of course, we have got every intention of delivering. And I have no doubt that in Michelle and Dan and our private sector player, we will be able to deliver that ambition. But we also accept that the demand of gas in the country is suppressed demand. It's suppressed because if it were not of the limitation of the gas that we are getting from Mozambique, I'm sure the industrial uses of gas will be much greater. The domestic gas uses in the country will be much greater. So at the conclusion of this, I'm confident that we are going to ensure that we unleash the potential of gas as a major player in the South African economy. Of course, we have made the point before that 2030 is an important timeline, because we do anticipate that by 2030 we are going to run into serious problems of gas supply. Sasol, one of our marquee organizations in this country, has been anchoring for a considerable period of time our gas supply in the country, and they've indicated that with the depletion of the existing indigenous gas in Mozambique, we are likely going to run into major challenges come 2028, 2030. And therefore, as a country, we need to de-risk ourselves from that gas cliff, and that's why we had to go this route of ensuring that we accelerate the construction of this infrastructure so that we are able to bring into the equation liquefied natural gas and not just rely on indigenous gas. I also want to mention that with the work that we are doing in the ministry, together with our counterparts in Mozambique, we are confident that we'll continue to work with our Mozambican partners to exploit the indigenous gas that is in Mozambique. Of course, we rely on Mozambique to bring that to market. And we are going to use the existing infrastructure in the form of the Ronco pipeline to ensure that we've got multiple points of gas supply in the country, into the country. What Richards Bay does is a location that is within the political and administrative boundaries of our country. But we do accept that there are huge opportunities in Mozambique, and that's why we'll continue to pursue that opportunity with our Mozambique counterparts. What this exercise does, outside just helping us to achieve energy security and ensuring that we deliver on the RP 2025, as Michelle has mentioned, is to ensure that it catalyzes economic growth in our country, because it's going to result in the resurgence of the build industry in the country. You can imagine the size of the build program that is going to go into the building of the construction of this infrastructure. It means that our construction industry that has been starved of opportunities as a result of an economy that is not growing, suddenly is going to find opportunities in this infrastructure that will be built in Richards Bay. It's also going to ensure that we are able to demonstrate to the rest of the world that our engineering and industrial capability still remains, that it's an inherent, if you like, advantage and capacity that the country has as a result of the work that we have done over a period of time. Of course, economic growth had plateaued and in fact come down over a period of time. And what that has done was to undermine our engineering and industrial capability. So what this infrastructure build program will do is to showcase the fact that that industrial and engineering capability still remains in the country. If anything, we are going to re-energize it going forward. So we're looking forward to the successful conclusion and construction of this major facility, as indicated by both Mr. Naidu and Michelle, is a first of its kind, the first receiving infrastructure LNG in the country. It's also the first major project that both Transnet and Eskom are working in collaboration. And when these two giants work together, the South African economy is likely going to explode. But we also accept that we will not be able to traverse and travel this together alone as government. We need to pull the private sector into the equation, and we welcome the ZET players for having been on board. First, that agreement, collaboration with Transnet, that is VOPEC and Transnet, we have ZET, and now Eskom has come into the equation. And I'm sure that the tripartite that is going to deliver this project will be able to demonstrate that when there's an intersection of interests of public and private sector, the economy will grow at levels that are unprecedented. And we are grateful of this opportunity. So what we want to say to the rest of the country is that the commitment we have made before of ensuring that there's energy security, of ensuring that we are going to use this energy security to reignite the South African economy is beginning to find meaning. I've illustrated with the work that we have done with the smelters. We are coming now to accommodate other smelters, the second generation of smelters, generation as in the second phase of this program, to ensure that we grow the South African economy. Once more, thanks to Eskom, thanks to Transnet, thanks to VOPEC for having put this together. The work starts now. Thank you very much.
Right now, moving swiftly along, let's listen to the speech of Eskom Group Chief Executive Dan Marokane on his excitement about the commitment between Eskom and the Zululand Energy Terminal.
Good morning, and thank you, Tsakani, for program directing. Good morning, Minister Dr. Mtetonyati, our Chairman. Good morning to my colleague, Advocate Michelle from Transnet, my colleagues from ZET. You are all welcome, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, and all our countrymen and women. It is an exciting moment for us as Eskom this morning, as we will shortly witness the signing of the heads of agreements that deals with the importation facility for natural or liquefied natural gas to enable us to fulfill our mandate of building the 3,000 megawatts of gas to power in Richards Bay. This project is part of the integrated resource plan, which looks for 6,000 megawatts, but Eskom has the responsibility to deliver half of that. The signing ceremony that you'll witness this morning essentially places us as Eskom as a foundation customer for the LNG terminal infrastructure for gas importation, and places the country for the first time in a position where the reality of gas to power is possible. We are undertaking this program as part of supporting the growth in renewable energy penetration within our energy mix. It is important to highlight that the capacity of dispatchable power is critical in ensuring grid stability in a space where renewable energy, variable renewable energy sources contributions start increasing. It is important that we locate this context also within the transition that we are experiencing as a country. And for that, we are quite excited that the partnership with Zululand Energy Terminal has really reached this point in time. What the signing today entails or means is that the ZET consortium will then be able to start doing all the front-end engineering and design studies to ensure the construction of the terminal, whilst on the one hand, Eskom itself will proceed with the partnership selection for its private sector participation for the construction of the power plant itself and all the associated work, including the revision of the resubmission of the environmental impact assessment. We are hopeful that all efforts from our side and both from our partners will help us move towards the 2030 timeline of ensuring that the power plant is ready, given the anticipated increase in the contribution of the renewables business. It is my utmost excitement that we have reached this stage, and I really want to thank our partners from ZET, which is a consortium made up of Transnet, Zululand, Transnet, VOPEC, and Reatile, all comprising what is essentially known as the Zululand Energy Terminal, and we look forward to collaboration and to many years of working together to make gas to power in this country a reality, and gas to support the rest of the industries, as other speakers will outline this morning. So we're looking forward to the signature this morning. Thank you very much.
And finally, let us hear from Mr. Oliver Naidu, the Director and Project Manager for the Zululand Energy Terminal.
Today marks an important milestone in the development journey of the Zululand Energy Terminal, South Africa's first liquefied natural gas import terminal. ZET is a strategic partnership between Vopak Terminal Durban and Transnet Pipelines, established to design, finance, construct, and operate critical LNG import infrastructure at the port of Richards Bay under a 25-year concession. Our role as terminal operator is to provide the infrastructure platform that will enable LNG to be received, stored, regasified, and distributed to power generation customers and industrial users across South Africa. The terminal is planned for the South Dunes precinct at berth 207. This location is strategically suitable because of its proximity to the port entrance channel, water depth of over 17 meters, sheltered marine conditions, and close alignment with existing liquid bulk infrastructure. The project is currently in early FEED phase, where we are advancing technical definition, environmental processes, engineering development frameworks, and stakeholder engagements. We will then proceed to complete the full FEED package, finalization of the environmental and regulatory approvals, conclusions of the commercial agreement which will be the terminal use agreement, and advance then to the final investment decision. The development will be phased to match market demand and support bankability. So we have two phases in this project. Phase 1 is expected to include a floating storage unit, an FSU, of at least 170,000 cubic meters, and an onshore regasification system with indicative capacity of approximately 3 million tons per annum, or around 400 million standard cubic feet per day. Phase 2 is expected to introduce an onshore LNG tank of approximately 220 cubic meters and additional regasification capacity. It will then increase the total capacity to approximately 4 million tons per annum, or around 600 million standard cubic feet per day. So the terminal will operate through a proven LNG value chain. LNG carriers will deliver LNG into the deep water berth. The LNG will be safely stored, regasified through onshore technology, and then distributed through pipeline infrastructure to customers. A key part of the system is the planned transfer hub within the Richards Bay development zone. This transfer point will be a central offtake where it will support industrial users and future gas to power connection. ZET will also connect to the Lily pipeline, which will then also support the industrial users that are currently connected on the system. Today's signing with Eskom is therefore a commercial milestone. Eskom's participation as one of our anchor customers strengthens the commercial foundation of the terminal and supports the transition of the project from concept to bankable infrastructure of national importance. The project also carries significant economic potential. It will support investment attraction, industrial growth, job creation, skills development, supply development, and new opportunities for Richards Bay and in KwaZulu-Natal. Beyond power generation, the terminal can unlock future opportunities in manufacturing, heavy industry, processing plants, commercial energy use, and downstream gas-based industries. As we move forward, our focus is clear: to progress the project responsibly, meet all regulatory and environmental requirements, complete the technical and commercial work required for FID, and deliver infrastructure that supports South Africa's future gas market. We are grateful to Eskom, to government, to Transnet, to TNPA, to all our stakeholders who actually contributed to make this a development of national significance. Thank you, and we are looking forward to as we further progress this project. Thank you.
All right, so those were the voices in the room today. And what struck me sitting there was not just the technical language, megawatts and LNG and all of that stuff, but what struck me was the sense of momentum, right? The sense that after years of talking about Africa's energy transition, things are actually starting to move. This is not just words. This is a signed agreement. There's something we can point to be able to hold our leaders accountable. There's something we can say, hey, you promised us the Zululand Energy Terminal, and this matters. Why does it matter, right? Because the energy crisis in South Africa has cost our country dearly. Sustained load shedding has shaved off percentage points from our GDP growth. Businesses have to close. It becomes difficult to invest in a place that can't keep the lights on. And our government has succeeded in overcoming load shedding, but who's to say the energy crisis won't rear its head again? Who's to say we won't see load shedding again if we don't fix our energy supply problems in a systemic manner? So what today represents is a credible, funded, and multi-party step towards the end of that era. This gas infrastructure, if it's done right, gives South Africa several things that it has lacked. It's given us flexibility to respond to variable energy output requirements, reliability as well. This is something we can keep coming back to. We can rely on this. And energy security by diversifying away from a single source of power supply. So that is a big development with this Zululand Energy Terminal, and it sends a signal to investors. When a project of this scale, it's backed by a government, anchored by Eskom, and it is developed by a world-class consortium, a world-class group of companies. When that kind of deal reaches this stage, it tells investors in the world that South Africa is a serious destination for energy infrastructure investment. Even though the road ahead is not without challenges, right? The final investment decision still needs to be taken. Environmental approvals are still in progress. And the long-term commercial contracts still need to be finalized. Construction hasn't begun. It won't begin for some years. So despite all of that, something real happened today. A framework was signed, a commitment was made, and South Africa moved one step closer to the gas infrastructure that its energy future depends on. So kudos to our minister, Dr. Hossein Mahopa, and kudos to the Zululand Energy Terminal. Hopefully, one of these days, we will be seeing liquefied natural gas powering our country. That is all I have for you on the show today. I told you we're going to be talking about 2 topics, and now we've done that. So come back another time for more. But for today, I've been Seakga Tladi, and I'm out of here.